Hi, Joyce.
Hi.
Actually, what I should say is hello, Dr. Joyce Ngūgī.
That's right. I prefer Wangarī, Dr. Joyce Wangarī.
Dr. Joyce Wangarī. And that is the name that we shall call you moving forward.
Okay.
Congratulations on your PhD.
Thank you.
Such a huge accomplishment. And I guess my first question would be for you to share with us what your decision-making process leading up to your doctoral studies was.
Let me start off by saying I am born into a family of healers, teachers, pastors, and educators. So I was fortunate to be a daughter of two university lecturers, and as a family value, high academic ambition has always been part of our growing up. And in my family, my parents raised me to be curious and to love knowledge. And therefore, I knew from an early age that I wanted to achieve just as much as my parents had done and more. So therefore, the field of mental health is one I got into out of personal tragedy, just as many of us do. And actually it is the topmost reason why many people enter this field. And so I knew at around Form 2, when we did subject selection, that this was going to be my field. I was going to make an impact and a contribution by being a psychologist. And at the subject selection then, I don't recall seeing those courses for the university selection. I mean, those were the days everybody was marshaled into either being a doctor or an engineer. But I found a lot of my own personal fulfillment out of doing this work. And of course, there is a big need that I needed to investigate. The thing with being a scholar is to understand the in-depth analysis of a particular phenomenon. In my case, my research at doctorate level was on the population which is deaf and hard of hearing who use sign language. And so I wanted to understand how mental health access is for this population in Kenya. And I found out that I am a pioneer in the field. There isn't much studies that have been conducted as well as recorded or written down on this area. So I was quite curious to go to the bottom of what is the gap and what actually would be some possible interventions for that.
Okay, thank you for that. And it actually does bring up, bring us to this point where, I mean, you've answered it so perfectly that it just is in line with, therefore, the next question about what your vision is for yourself as a psychologist with the highest level of training vis-a-vis the mental health terrain locally in Africa and the world. Yeah, will it just be around the area of disability?
Yeah, good question. So first of all, the PSYD is distinct from the PhD because it's a practitioner-scholar model.
Okay.
And the reason I embarked on a doctorate, which at the time was 5 years, although it was revised to 3.5 years, is so as to get in-depth skills in case conceptualization and treatment planning. So that is really my mainstay in the field. Lots of psychological assessments, and I have honed the skills of really getting into what are the descriptions of suffering, in other words, in our population. And of course, you know that a lot of our assessments are still not customized and not culturally adapted to our population. So I am now holding the question currently under a forum I run called the Forum of African Psychology on how can we contextualize Africanized and African-centered therapies, interventions, theories, and treatments in mental health. And so aside from this population, which is my passion, who use sign language, the deaf and the hard of hearing, aside from that, I'm really keen currently on really creating work that meets the directly. Unfortunately, our training is highly Western-based and may not have the model that actually can meet the need. And why do I say that this is a fact? Is that we have evidence that there's still a lot of suffering, and a lot of the people in the general population do not even understand the kind of interventions that we can actually introduce or that we can develop and co-design with them. And so I'm all into getting into the community and getting to see what actually works from the perspective of the community, which is quite distinctly different from you know, what we have been taught to be book knowledge and scholarly academic pursuit. And so I am really at the interface of creating more visible African interventions for mental health.
I love what you're saying. I love what you're saying, because this is one breakaway that we really need to be able to do yesterday. To be able to come up with models that are adapted to our culture, our tradition, our beliefs, in a way that will serve us, not in a way that will promote, you know, negative ethnicity, tribalism, or, you know, harmful traditional practices, or, you know, over religiosity or stuff like that, which is the unfortunate thing that people think about the moment you talk about African psychology, you know, or some sort of mysterious, mystical definition that has been put out there. The truth of the matter is, even before the people who have come before us could say this is mental illness, part of the reason I think the word doesn't even exist in most of our languages, tribal, African, is because I don't think somebody being different from others was labeled abnormal. I think they found a way for this person to be either accommodated or live alongside the community. And part of that also had to do with accepting that the person has an issue where they are different from everybody else, but it wasn't criminalized. Let me put it like that.
Yeah.
You know, like we have information about the kind of affirmation ceremonies that used to happen for people who, for example, committed some I wouldn't call them crimes. They conducted themselves in a way that was not in line with the mores of the community, and they would be surrounded, and somebody would begin by saying something positive about them. The next person would say something positive and say, you are hardworking, you know, you are loving, you are loved, you know, you are an eloquent speaker, you are confident, you're a great fighter, you are a good husband, you're a, you know, it was actually all about being able to correct people from some like positive behavioral modification approaches. So it will be interesting to see what you do with this. I am definitely all for it. To also be able to use what the people before us have used, you know, like mountains, forests.
No, I love what you're saying, but speaking of laws, look at even our current ethics that we are taught in school. Our ethical codes are mostly quite prescriptive, and many professionals think I have to tick the box and follow every ethics code.
Yes.
While actually a real Africanized ethics discussion would be to see what fits and what actually doesn't fit.
Right.
Because it's all imported currently. And when we talk about some ethical things such as barter trade, which has been in our community for centuries. People will bring a goat or a chicken in the rural, I'm currently in the rural setup. And those places where it is quite remote and psychology has not yet really been well known, but people know about healing and people know about rewarding the healer, and then they will bring a gift such as a chicken or a goat. So those are some of the discussions that I feel like we haven't gotten to the bottom of, and we're still quite hung up with a very prescriptive but quite narrow checklist of what needs to be ethical without really looking at the bigger picture. And ethics discussion should be the bigger picture of what you're talking about. What are our mores? What are our norms? What are really our cultural values? And where do we call ourselves a global village? Where does indigenous versus globalization, really meet? And also I liked what you also introduced on landscapes. I'm really big on creative art therapies, nature therapy. And I'll be looking into, partnering with organizations such as yours and different others that are actually out in the community giving people wellness in the terms that actually people can move from point A to point B and really connect.
Yeah.
I think that's the idea.
And yeah, I think that conversation really needs to be expanded, because the idea that people cannot be of service to the community or meet the community where it's at because they have not met the criteria that has been set by people who live in a totally different existence, that also should lead us to question our own way of, framing and understanding of the reality that we are living in, because it's not practical in any way. And if you actually look at how things are changing right now globally, even in the practice of psychology, in the beginning it was like so individualistic. In the beginning it was this thing where it's just about you, but our setting has always been more community, more holistic. And this is where now we can see the Western practice coming back to. It's now more about how do you create an environment where you center somebody. Now we are on the conversation of drums and string instruments and dance and art. All these things are our ways.
Yes.
So we do have a lot to offer, but we need to be able to get ourselves together in order to create that kind of not even a manual, a sort of a base understanding. And so I'm looking forward to see you leading that way.
Sadly, people still call this alternative. They are not alternative.
That's mainstream.
This is our mainstream.
Yes,
yeah.
It is our mainstream.
Right. Yeah.
It is our mainstream.
Yeah.
It is our mainstream. So, what do you see happening? What do you see happening with that? Because, what is your view about what are supporting systems necessary for the kind of psychology that, you and I are talking about and agreeing on as a tool in the preventive, the treatment, the care and protection areas that are meant to address the burden of healthcare, the burden on the criminal justice system, the political system, the educational system, and our economic system. Yeah.
First of all, let me start by saying I think we're in an opportune time with COVID having opened up a new world order. We all did not anticipate this unprecedented turn of events in our global landscape, and the use of virtual technology has really been a big benefit. We just hosted the biggest so far. It was the 4th Pan-Africa Psychology Conference in July 2021, and it was on Zoom. We expected only 2 hours and we will be done, but we had representation from all over Africa, and the meeting lasted well over 3 hours. And Africans are great storytellers, so I must say we were chatting the way forward for what we want for Africa. But I must say mental health plays an important role in each and every sector. When you look at the criminal justice system, security system, education system, we are all about studying the human brain and behavior. So anywhere there are human beings, there is mental health. And our mental health interventions cannot stop just because the systems have not been created.
Right.
We need more pioneers, more change makers, people who actually pave the way for what needs to be institutionalized or instituted. So for instance, in the space of prevention, we haven't even scratched the surface on outreach, awareness, and advocacy.
That's true.
So currently we have people in the general population who are struggling with mild, moderate, levels of, certain conditions, depression, trauma. They don't know what it is. They end up maybe buying painkiller, for headache. And most of them will get well, but a few will keep struggling. But the problem is, for those people who have mental health conditions that are untreated or not addressed, those can actually graduate into more severe conditions. And now we are facing a big number of substance use disorders. A lot of people, especially when the bars were closed down because of the COVID curfew guidelines, we found a lot of people drinking from home. So that's a pandemic going on. And that's just on the prevention side, just the education about it, and people linking their everyday life and their lifestyle and their symptoms with what could be going on that may need, some specialized treatment. Then, when we move into the field of treatment and rehabilitation, cure and things like that, we are still not well regulated as a mental health field. I feel like as professionals currently, we are all operating from virtue ethics, from being virtuous people. And the danger with that is sometimes there's a lot of abuse, by those people who may be professionals and others may be quacks. And because there are no consequences for, mental health interventions that go awry, therefore, then our standards are lower than many people end up not trusting our service. And so we need a lot of work in regulation and policy development in the field of intervention. We also need to scale it up. The reason why every day on the news you will hear of a homicide, a suicide, and a lot of family conflict is because many people will not connect that to, there's something going on in my mental health. So therefore, intervention and treatment is a big gap in this country. It's quite costly, and even those affordable places do not have enough capacity. So we have an onerous task ahead. I don't think that we'll finish all the work this century, but at least we can do whatever it is, whether it's a drop in the ocean, but that will make an impact in prevention, treatment, and the entire spectrum of what I would like to call the lifetime treatment pathway, because I think we also don't have yet a system that actually looks at a human being from when they are born till old age, the entire lifespan development. What we seem to have in this setting is silos of different pockets, mostly donor funded, and these projects are doing a very short-term work for mental health, and that's not sustainable. So we need to get all players on board, government and other players, so that we create a lifespan model that actually has people held and supported, and that it's okay. In some countries in the world, you will find very, very robust systems, including assisted care homes where people can actually create a lifestyle out of talking about their issues and being with people with similar conditions, and they get direct government funding. We are not there yet. In Kenya, if you are ill today, it's going to be more than a tragedy. It's actually dangerous because you could die, and most people will not be able to afford. People are starving. People do not even have basic needs. Therefore, mental health is currently like a luxury. While insurance companies are trying to bring mental health services on board, still a lot needs to be done for the very basic services to be availed to Wananchi in a way that they can actually benefit and enjoy the service.
What you've talked about is so profound. It's so profound because you and I know that the mental health aspect cuts across the different systems of existence in our community, from education to politics, to justice, to crime, to health, to all those things. And I know I didn't give you this question before, so you'll just need to go with it, because we are now in the political season of this country. And we are already seeing, for those of us who can see, we are seeing that we are now nearing the culmination of repeating the cycle of the political and election cycle that we do every 5 years, that often culminates with violence and, you know, murders and deaths and, you know, just a lot of chaos that injures people's consciousness, that injures people's futures, that injures our economy, and gives us a repeated, compounded, collective, traumatic situation that we again live in and incubating for the next 5 years, and then we repeat the cycle. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, first of all, I'm an Afro-optimist, so I am quite optimistic that even when villages are burnt down, there's always that mama mboga who will light up her stove and sit in the middle of that heap of rubble and say life must go on. So having said that, we don't need to actually create a problem in order to treat it. We actually need to prevent it. Right now, the media has received some sensitization trainings, I'm aware of that, and a few pockets of journalists are now aware of trauma-informed reporting, which is great. Still, a lot needs to be done, because the channels of news information have now moved from mass media and television to our social media, and now everybody can send raw pictures, which are actually very disturbing, and the regulation on that is still out there. We're still not having enough of that. So a lot of us who live ordinary lives would like our politicians to know that they actually are holding the fate of Kenyans, you know, in their hands. And so it would be wonderful to have a sensitization to politicians. I'm not sure that it has reached parliament or the political class yet. I feel like currently there's still a lot of bickering along ethnicity lines, and that actually divides our country. While Kenyans have a rich heritage and can learn from history, it is very critical for those historians who can remind us to actually remind us of what happened in the past, so that we do not fall into that trap again. And for us who are in the mental health space, rather than having to wait for victims and perpetrators and, you know, having to, you know, design interventions for when, you know, violence will happen, I think we should really heavily invest on the prevention work, the work that actually maintains peace at all costs and has people actually understand you know, the nitty-gritties of what happens when we begin to fight. While people are very charged when they feel right, I think politics is one of those fields, just like religion, where people can be quite fundamentalist and dogmatic. You know, you become stuck in what you think you know, and many people may not understand how polarizing that is and what that is vis-a-vis our national values. So I think we just still have a lot of work there around national cohesion, integration, and getting the members of the public to actually advocate for those posts that are disturbing to be pulled down, you know? Anywhere they are, whether it's on social media, TV, radio. A lot of our vernacular radio stations currently, it is so sad, they have been made into some tribal cocoons now, and I think recently a lot of them were shut down because they were counterproductive to the nationalism agenda. So while we want to celebrate our linguistic variety, you know, our ethnic communities, we should not use those as, you know, ways to actually make people fight. So we need to be really careful. Our conscience as a country is very, very broken right now. Our social fabric right now is very fragile. So if we do not take caution, then we're going to fall into that pit. But I must say, as an optimist, that Africans, Kenyans are very resilient people. I have seen, you know, out of the ruins of post-election violence over and over again, people just rebuilding an entire community afresh, having lost so much. And I think we also excel in our culture in the field of loss, grief, and bereavement. I think our culture is very, very good with that. We've had, if anybody dies, you and I both know, in our communities, the community literally steps in. So in other words, we can continue working together but remove those elements that actually separate us.
Wow. Listening to you, I'm just like, especially that part where you said having to witness once again rising from the embers of political violence as a result of election disputes over and over again. That one over and over again is what irks me personally. And what I also know to be true is that given my age, you know, I turned 43 this year, given my experience, you know, I once served as a military officer. I have had exposure at a national level. I have had the opportunity to interact with members of parliament. I have had an opportunity to speak to not just Kenya, but Africa and the world. I feel like I don't have the right to complain. I feel like I have the responsibility to throw myself into the process of ensuring that, number one, there is an awareness about how words can trigger behavior that is harmful. You talked about sensitivity training. Honestly, I feel like this is the one thing that needs to happen in this country. There has to be a way in which to sensitize decision makers, politicians, so that they can make trauma-informed comments, trauma-informed contributions, trauma-informed laws, trauma-informed policies, because that's where we are as a country. Sometimes I feel like our ability to be so resilient is used as a way to continuously and repeatedly abuse us as Kenyans. And so you have people who every 5 years their lives have to be turned upside down. That's not normal. And I know that most psychologists are shying away from talking about the mental health aspect in the political sphere. How do you think we should go about being apolitical while being able to bring consciousness into this conversation at this particular time that is so sensitive?
Yeah, I like that question because as a seasoned psychologist with 15 years experience, I can tell you I've been on many media interviews where you can speak to an issue on a generalized term, but actually that specifically also hits the nail on the head. So I would say it would not be very valuable to mention names or begin to do personality assessments of all these politicians, some of whom we know are really disturbed. But I think what would be most valuable is to have members of the general public sensitized on what they need to look out for that they need to avoid. For instance, there's been a lot of cultures around politicians promising people a lot of things, and when these things don't come to pass, those are the roots of violence. So if we could investigate the behaviors that make the electorate move in a certain direction and then have them know so that they are making informed decisions every step of the way. And now we can talk about the symptomatology of, mental distress on a very broad and generalist way, so that people can begin to identify signs and symptoms that are going on within them, in their families, with their friends, with their colleagues, and there is definitely going to be a transition. We are all hoping for the best, but I think also we can prepare for the worst. So in a sense, my optimism is not blind, it is what I would call informed optimism, that we actually can prepare for the worst by getting people to see what they cannot tolerate. So for instance, if a community leader knew that these steps would actually lead to violence, then they would not even take the decision to, have the community fight. And yes, we do have activists, we do have quite a lot of people who are all about transformative change, and we all have a Kenya we want to see.
Right.
But I think where the work really is that the electorate are the ones who actually elected the leaders. And so if the electorate say enough is enough, we're not going to have any more of this, then the leaders have nothing else to do but to follow that direction. For the political class, we know that there are many other motivations and interests that guide their behavior, most of them capitalist. And so what we want to do there in that space is really have them trauma-informed, and as I said earlier, this should go to all the houses, parliament, as well as, anybody even considering entering politics. I know now there's a big training movement that's geared towards women politicians because they face a certain unique set of circumstances as women. There's also trainings for people with disabilities trying to get into politics. I don't know that we've adequately covered the men who are the majority of politicians in this country. I feel like we let them have a free pass at everything, and the impunity in this country is on an all-time high. So I don't see the reason why, we should shy away from talking about these things. I think these are issues that are about humanity, and everybody's voice is important.